Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Pitts, and this is my final project presentation on my unit called Mi Comunidad. A little intro to the unit. The unit is is a Spanish 2 class on our community. This would be a unit that we would do second semester, and the organization of the unit is in two parts. The first part of the unit, students learn how to describe the layout of a community, which involves learning vocabulary related to establishments and grammar, learning how to give and understand directions. The second half of the unit, students learn how to talk about the social structure of a community, where we learn about different festivals and celebrations, and students learn how to conjugate verbs in the past tense to describe a celebration that they quote unquote attended. Some information about my class and my students. I mentioned it is a Spanish 2 class in a high school. I have a class size of 24 students. 18 of them are sophomores and 6 of them are juniors. Students' ages range between 15 and 17. I do not have any ML students in this class because this class is a class for monolingual students who are learning their second language. There are 21 students who are Caucasian in this class, 2 who are Hispanic, and 1 who is an Asian student. 5 of my students have a 504 or an IEP plan. Those students who have a 504, their accommodations are predominantly for math and some of them a couple of them have extended time on test and the ability to take their test in an alternate location. My 2 students who have an IEP, one of those students suffers from migraines, and the other student has access to bathroom breaks and movement breaks. I have 4 students who are in the AVID program. And as on our school report card, I found that 41 of our students come from low-income families. I don't have access to know which of my students that relates to. The objectives of our unit, students are able to track their progress both communicatively and with relation to our cultural topics. We have I can statements that we post throughout the unit, and students are able, and we are able to check in with them on their progress for each of those targets. The essential questions and unit goals relate to the entire unit, and we are, for my project's sake, I am only focusing on the first half of the unit. So for the essential question, we will be focusing first on how culture is shaped based on where people go and what they do within their community, and how people come together to celebrate their cultural identity and community is more for the second half of the unit when we talk about festivals, as is the third essential question. So essential question 2 and 3 are more for the second half of the unit. For our unit goals, the unit goal with talking about layout, services, and transportation is in the first half of the unit, and we do talk a lot about Nicaragua and the different communities and cities and areas of Nicaragua, and some of the things like plazas and mercados. Students also learn in this unit how to understand directions from like point A to point B, and how to give directions from point A to point B. The last 2 unit goals are for the second half of the unit. I did attempt to try to get my mind around the dynamic instruction design. I typically approach a unit and think of backwards design, but this was a new perspective that I wanted to try. I liked that it made me stop to think about who my students are and where their skill levels are entering a unit. That's important because it helped me think about the objectives and gave me a clearer idea of how I wanted to get them to the end point, and that those instructions and activities and assessments that would be layered and how they fit together within the unit. I did put in a new project for my students and attempted to do the problem-based learning, and the unit led up to that as the assessment. I'm using quite a bit of technology in this unit. We always have our computers available to us. Every student it's a one-on-one, so every student has a Chromebook, and I have a MacBook available to me. I am integrating videos through YouTube and TikTok. There is a website that we practice vocabulary and grammar in a gamified way, and that's the Conjuguemos in the Middle. We will be using Google Earth to explore communities and cities in Nicaragua. And we will be using Canva, and our students can use Canva or Google Presentation in order to create their project. I really liked how the book gave me a different perspective on the added value of technology. It said, for effective learning, students must do more than listen and watch. They must also engage in the content by discussing, writing, debating, collaborating, researching, or performing a mix of these. For deep learning, students must think critically about the content, not simply recall and regurgitate facts presented by a teacher. I think that last part hit close to me because a traditional classroom, often people think in Spanish class there's a lot of memorization of vocabulary, conjugating verbs, and that regurgitation of facts, and simply recalling vocabulary words is just so far from where we have gone in the last couple of decades in learning languages. Taking, things like note taking and lectures on grammar, and even just creating skits and labeling maps and doing worksheets and quizzes on paper, and it's just gone so much more than that, and we want students to think critically. And I think that the approach that I attempted, and the technology I am incorporating is at least attempting to make this more engaging for students. And yeah. Here is some examples of my handouts, and I'll let you know what day each of those things will be used. So for day one, students will be in groups, and they will be labeling maps from our own community with important locations that a newcomer would need to know about. Where we would learn a verb called quedar to learn how to talk about where those locations are located. The second activity is where we'll pull in some videos from YouTube and TikTok in order to literally see a community in Nicaragua or communities in Nicaragua. Students can then be able to discuss similarities and differences in a real way, and not just like looking at pictures. The final activities, students will pull up Google Earth and find a city in Nicaragua, and use that street view in order to write 5 sentences that describe the city and the locations of some of the establishments within that city using that new verb. Day 2 This bottom activity right here is an example of the reading on the Mercado, which is a market, like a outdoor market. And then the other, I don't have the image for the other reading, but there would be another reading on plazas, and half the class will be reading together the reading on mercados, and the other one half of the class will do a reading on plazas. And once we finish those, then kind of as a little bit of a jigsaw activity, they'll have to find somebody and pair up with a classmate who did a reading on the opposite and teach them what they learned. For homework, that's where the top activity comes in. They'll do a flipped lesson on the grammar. The grammar that they're going to learn is how to give directions in Spanish. They'll have the option either to watch this video here and take notes, or and this would be my first time trying GPT for students, but they would have to copy and paste the quote into ChatGPT and use it as a tutor. And whether they take notes from the video or ChatGPT, we have a 2-column note page that students would take notes on for homework. Day 3, students will be doing a station rotation. One of the stations, they'd actually have to meet with me and walk me through the notes that they took the night before. And if they don't have all the important information, I would redirect them back to the notes for them to fill in those and recheck in with me. Station 2 is looking at a physical map, and they would have to use those notes in order to write directions from the plaza from the plaza to the mercado. Here's a quick example of that which I'm talking about. So they would write directions from point 4 to point 1 to 4, and these verbs here, empieza and sigue and cruza, are examples of the grammar that they took the notes before the night before. Station 4 is a practice using Gimkit or Conjuguemos, and on Gimkit they would have to earn $1 million before they could close out that station. In Station 4, they would have to write, practice, and rehearse giving directions from their house to their house from our school. And then they would record their response on Schoology in a video assignment. Day 4 is where the problem-based learning comes in, or the project. They would walk into the classroom. To get their attention, I would say there's some sad news. The town that we had talked about on the first day was hit with a natural disaster, and try to grab their attention. And to make it a little bit more real, there will be a gallery walk for them to see the images of the effects, along with specific questions at each place for students to talk about and discuss. That would lead into the guidelines for the project, where they would be working together in small groups to help rebuild the community, coming up with a plan of where the establishments need to be rebuilt or relocated, and talking about where all those places what they are and where they'll be located. Days 5 through 7 is where they'll be working with their groups to discuss their plans and develop their plans and draw them up and learn how to and describe and create their presentation. I will be working with individual groups to make sure they're on task and following the timeline. And then days 8 and 9 are when the groups will actually be doing their presentations. Here's that student sample again. All right. So within my unit, I'm integrating a number of technology in a number of areas. An example of augmentation within my unit is the use of Gimkit. Gimkit replaces, writing vocabulary words out several times, or even making flashcards. It makes it fun through gamification, but it also helps give them that immediate feedback. They get feedback on what the word sounds like, how it's written, and what it means. So it gives that little added value. Some examples of modification is with the use of YouTube. YouTube and ChatGPT, they're able to take notes in a new way. They it they Teachers also could use those notes and upload them into Notebook LM and create a podcast for students as a review option, or even create a video overview. And students can have those at the end of the unit to review from. Google Earth is an example of redefinition, because from within their classroom, they can be, through virtual reality, able to see a community on the other side of the Earth. For the summative evaluation, I would use the rubric similar to the one here in order to give them feedback on their presentations. And then I would also have students fill out a reflection similar to this on Google Forms in order to get their feedback on their learning experience. And this would allow me to adjust the activities and prepare for future lessons for students as needed, as any kind of interventions might be needed and reteaching moments might be needed. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. It's been a pleasure.